webinar, which is an introduction to green graphic design with Dom and Jimmy from MinitWorks Design Company. We'll keep it short because I know that Dom and Jimmy have got a lot they'd like to get through. So just a reminder that this webinar today is part of the Refresh project, which is a community of practice of 12 museums, all looking to improve their displays and visitor experience. It's run by the Museum Development Service for Surrey, East and West Sussex, and funded by the Arts Council. So please do make use of the chat function. We will take a break for questions partway through and then again at the end. But if you do think of a question at any time, feel free to just post it and I'll make sure that it gets asked. As well, if you want to make any comments in the chat function, please do make use of that facility. It's always really great. So my name is Jenny and I'm from Heritage Insider. I'll be facilitating today, so managing the chat options, but mostly I'm going to be keeping quiet and leaving you to the very wise Dom and Jimmy from MinitWorks. Up to you then, guys.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking some time out of your Friday afternoon. We really appreciate that. This voice belongs to Dom.
I'm Jimmy.
Okay, and we thought we'd open with kind of a brief introduction to MinitWorks. So we started off life as a collection of artists and designers and activists, and we worked under another name, Ultimate Holding Company, and we were all involved with socially engaged art projects. So that's art that was defined by place and people as opposed to one artist's vision. So to give you a couple of examples of projects that we did together, this first image is taken from some work called Camp X-Ray, in which we built a fully operational life-size replica of the US internment camp at Guantanamo Bay. We actually built this on some scrubland in Manchester, and as a piece of performance art, it sets out to challenge audiences and to question Guantanamo Bay's existence and its justification. And we did that by essentially offering volunteers experiences of incarceration and sensory deprivation. No one was harmed. So, another project that we actually received quite a fair amount of press for was called Extinct. This is an art and ecology project in which 100 original drawings of endangered species, British species, were tattooed onto 100 animal ambassadors. Now, we were lucky enough to receive some funding for this project from the Arts Council, and that allowed us to stage a national tour, which provided a unique insight into the potential of art and design to explore and hopefully influence species loss as well as conservation. Now, kind of adjacent to the art activity, we set up a graphic design department, and it was initially set up to provide artists working on low-income commissions with a source of additional funding. We set ourselves some rules, so we'd only ever work with like-minded organisations and people. We wouldn't take on any amoral projects, and I think what we meant by that is that we would avoid work for a cigarette maker, for example, potentially private healthcare companies, supermarkets, and so on. Essentially, no work for organisations that had explicit neoliberal agendas. So as a design studio, the work took quite quickly, and we found ourselves creating concepts for campaigns, limited edition books, political reports. We've done festival guides, illustrations, websites. We even in one project ended up making hand-printed compost bags. So everything you can imagine. Things went well, and over the course of time, we decided that we would rebrand and relaunch ourselves as a standalone service, graphic design studio, and the name we chose was MinitWorks. Now, what you're looking at on screen here is the cover of the magazine, the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences on the left, which is produced by the same people that came up with the concept for the Doomsday Clock. We were kind of inspired by the idea of a counteractive movement that would be focused on putting minutes back on that clock. so counting up and away from 0 on the right and 55 below, and that's this direct reference to the fact that the clock is currently set at 11:55 or 5 minutes to midnight. So Jimmy's going to give you a couple of examples of some of our recent projects.
So we've got 3 examples. The first one is this is the Common Cause for Nature, which is a report that we produced for the Public Interest Research Centre. And this is a report which looks into frames and values. It's more of an elaborate report, a printed report with icons and infographics throughout. We're going to go into a bit more detail about this throughout the presentation, so I'll leave that one there. The second example of a project we've got is this was called the 30 Acts of Courage, and this was created in response to a brief from Greenpeace. We work with Greenpeace quite regularly, and in this case, they came to us asking for a concept to stage an intervention outside of the Shell Centre in London. And this was, the aim of this project was to attract attention and embarrass Shell, and to hopefully create some media attention around the Arctic 30, which are a group of activists currently incarcerated in Russian prisons. So we proposed the idea of a mock art gallery sort of photography exhibition outside, like you might see sometimes in town squares, of sort of wildlife photos on local photographs. We sort of tried to take that and represent that format as something that might be quite embarrassing for Shell to have at the front of their building. And we took the colour palette from the side of the boat that the Arctic 30 rode in. So I'll move on to the next project now. This one is a part of a map that we created for Liverpool Art Prize and Art Month. We worked with Metal Culture Liverpool on numerous occasions throughout the recent years to help develop the identity for Liverpool Art Prize and Art Month. And this normally results in design for print, including festival guides and maps like this, as well as external signage, exhibition graphics, and various environmental graphics. So they're the 3 projects that we thought might want to highlight. And if you'd like to get in touch with us as MinuteWorks, we have a Twitter account, which is at MinuteWorks. Our website and our journal links are on the second slide of this presentation. So I'll move on from there, and Dom can take back over.
Okay, so we thought we should set out by explaining what we mean when we say conscientious design. So I think we term this as giving balanced consideration to environmental, social and economic resources. So we've put together this diagram to explain a little bit more. So environmental, there we're considering carbon footprints, use of sustainable energy or otherwise. Resource use, everything from paper, plastic, ink, water, wood, all the materials that we use to do our work. Social, we define as, the people that we collaborate with, their audiences, or our collective audiences, and the values that we look to appeal to. And economic, we're not talking about money, we're talking about what money is a trick to disguise, and that's time and energy, the time and energy that's given over to the design process and also print process, and keeping those in mind in relation to the project requirements and the scope. So conscientious design happens when they meet in the middle. So another word for conscientious, if you like, might be sustainable. So relating to forms of culture and production that do not lead to environmental degradation, avoiding the long-term depletion of natural resources, or the utilisation and development of natural resources in ways that are compatible with the maintenance of these resources and the conservation of the environment for future generations. Now, there's a reason why we've avoided using the word sustainable in the title of our talk, and quite broadly, that reason is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, bear with me here. So the second law of thermodynamics, if you're not familiar with it, says that we, it's a scientific law, and it suggests that we should look at objects not as singular, but as being made up of many constituent parts. And over time, as these objects are exposed to the elements, the law says that it's mathematically more likely that the parts will break down, and the binds that tie them will become weaker. So the second law of thermodynamics, it relates to how states of order slowly transform into states of disorder. And it also defines the fact that time only runs in one direction. So an easy way to think about it is the aging process. And to paraphrase Brian Cox, to think of a sandcastle on a beach that's exposed to wind, and the grains of sand are slowly falling away from that shape, from that object. So as a concept, keep that in mind for now, because we will return to it later in the talk. What we'll go on to next is, why should design be conscientious? So this slide on screen now, this is showing you something called the golden circle. This is an idea that's put forward by a guy called Simon Sinek, who does a really good TED talk called How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And what Sinek does is he talks about the way that organizations communicate. He says some know how they do it, very few know why they do it, and very few talk about why their organization exists. And he says most people communicate in the opposite order to this circle. So instead of starting with why at the center, they actually start with what, and then they move on to how, and then they get to why. And the example that he gives is, he says, if you think of Apple Mac, the technology company, if they were like other technology companies, their marketing might say, we make computers, they look good and are easy to use, would you like to buy one? So that's, what they do, how, and why, essentially. And you'll probably agree that as a sales pitch, that maybe sounded a little bit uninspiring. That's certainly what Sinek suggests. Well, on this next slide, we've got an example of an advert from Apple, and this is how they actually communicate. They start in the center of that circle with why, they move out to how, and then what. So Apple say, we believe in thinking differently and changing the accepted standard. The way that we do this is by making beautiful products that are exciting and they're easy to use. They're products that make your day-to-day life easy and fun. And it just so happens that all of that passion for what we believe, we've gone ahead and we've put all of that into this phone. Would you like one? And Sinek's argument is that that is a much more attractive proposition. And I mean, the truth is that Apple don't differ greatly from their competitors. However, the way they communicate does. So maybe take time to, we'll make this presentation available perhaps. Take time to read this ad, see the composition, how the phone is secondary to where they're talking about their beliefs in the text. Sinek summarizes all this by saying people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. We'd like to, again, paraphrase that as people don't support what you do, they support your values. So a second example that Sinek gives is of a man called Samuel Pierpont Langley. He's on the left here. Take a moment to observe the ornate chair that he sat in. And on the right-hand side are the Wright brothers. Now, you may not have, I certainly hadn't heard of Pierpont Langley until I listened to Sinek's talk. Langley received government funding to invest in the building of a machine capable of controlled and powered flight. However, he never achieved this aim despite having access to some of the most expensive and best designers and engineers working at the time. Now, in contrast, the Wright brothers were unfunded and unconnected, in terms of industry and status. However, they were driven by a belief and a purpose, and they would go around talking about what they wanted to achieve, why they believed it was important, and people were inspired by this and many chose to collaborate with them just out of sheer shared passion. They supported their values. And so what happens? The Wright brothers invent flight, and obviously Langley doesn't. And so Langley's interest in aviation ends at this point. Why? Well, because he's motivated by money and power, and he can't achieve either of these anymore through the pursuit. And so this kind of explains that we think, and Sinek thinks, why you might not have heard of Langley until a moment ago. You've heard of the Wright brothers because people don't support what you do, they support your values. So if you talk about what you believe, you'll attract people who share those values. Well, what does any of this have to do with commissioning conscientious design for the heritage sector? We want to touch really quickly here on the Public Interest Research Centre's work on values and frames. It relates to the Common Cause for Nature report we showed you quickly. We won't spend long talking about this because I think in the near future, Ralph from PERC will be giving another talk, which we'd really recommend because they're great guys, they do some amazing research. But just very quickly, this is a values map, and it shows how researchers working in over 80 countries have found 60 values that appear to reoccur across cultures, and they have mapped the relationships between them. So the closer together the values are, the more likely we are to prioritize them. So for example, let's say hypothetically, if I'm honest, I'm more likely to prioritize a forgiving nature, being helpful, being loyal. That's all in the benevolence area of this diagram that you can see up in the top right-hand corner. Now, by contrast, the further away each value is, the less likely. So again, if we say, okay, so I'm honest, then I'm less likely to be self-indulgent, according to the mapping of the values. So this gives rise to the opposition effect, which is an idea that says that if you engage one value, then you can suppress the opposing value. And it also gives rise to something called the spillover effect. This says by engaging one value, you can also engage values that are close to it. So if we take heritage organisations as an example, we might imagine that people within them are driven by values and beliefs such as maybe honouring our elders or respect for tradition. So looking at the map, engaging these values may also engage other values such as politeness, responsibility, loyalty, and even meaning in life. Now the point to remember obviously is, values, our experiences shape our values. So keeping in that mind, we'd like you to imagine for a moment that you are commissioning a designer to create a menu that will be presented at an evening event based to celebrate culture and heritage. This is a menu that was designed by another studio for the Ivy in London. And the designer of this menu has chosen what's most likely, or hypothetically, let's be fair and say, a 100% virgin fibre paper made from trees that have been cut down specifically for the purpose of making new paper. They then printed this paper with, that's a reflective metallic ink that you can see in the leaves. That will contain heavy metals and volatile organic compounds. And then they've also had a leather embossed cover produced, which you may argue is to increase the durability of the contents, but it also adds a sense of value, if you like. So you approve this work and you hand it out to your audience. Let's go back to the values map for a moment. Well, what you've actually got here is a booklet that is communicating self-indulgence, ambition, and perhaps even wealth. It's a very expensive piece of print. And these values, according to the map, are all opposed to the values that we imagine somebody in the heritage sector might hold. So, yeah, there's a contradiction there that's created between the product and the values that the Heritage Centre has.
So I'll move on to a slightly different example that shows the opposite, possibly. So this is a publication created by a design agency called Tama Matthews, and this was a self-commissioned project that they did themselves to demonstrate a few of their core values and the way in which they work and some examples of their work towards the sustainable way of working. So this, as you can see, it's sort of quite an unusual publication. The way it's folded, the internal pages are called French folds, where you get this print on the inside of the sheets. But these are used because they've used the printers make-ready sheets. This is paper that the printer puts through their printing press while they adjust it, i.e. make it ready for a printing job. They run the same sheets through again and again, then usually recycle them. But as you can see, they've been run through once or twice on sheet that has a number 1 at the top. You can see the green is sort of overlapping the blue. So these would usually be used and then thrown away, recycled, once or twice a week. Whereas these, the design studio that created this saw this paper as quite a beautiful thing that demonstrates their ideologies behind sustainability and reusable materials. So they asked them to save these sheets of paper, and they decided to print on the reverse. So this project uses vegetable-based inks, which are more environmentally friendly than solvent-based inks. And overall, the result is humble, respectful, honest, and responsible. It's all values that align with what your organization values. So why should design be conscientious, besides the fact that working unsustainably is irresponsible? So at the end of that section, we have, I'm pressing the wrong button. We have a tip. We've got a couple of tips throughout the presentation. This is the first, which is don't undermine your beliefs and values by commissioning or practicing unconscientious design. And I think we'll stop there for this first question break, if that's okay, Jenny. Sorry, Jenny, I'm not sure if we're having a little bit of trouble with our speakers or anything, but I think we might have lost our audio temporarily.
Hello?
Oh, hello, we can hear you now.
Hello, we can hear you now.
Hey! Sorry, that was my mistake. Yes, so if we have got any questions, then we'll take those now. I have posted and no one's come up with any so far, so if we haven't got any questions, just let us know and we'll move on. But I think that's a really great tip there, guys, about the not undermining your beliefs and not giving in on your values.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, we find that's really important. The number of instances in which we will be approached to produce a piece of design, and somebody will see something that they like somewhere else, but what they're actually asking for doesn't align with what their organisation may stand for. Is you wouldn't believe the number of occasions that happens. So it's
absolutely.
important.
And I think for Heritage, it can be not just about the design that we're doing, but the events we're putting on, or so many areas, and not undermining our beliefs and our values and what we stand for selling out for other exhibitions or for putting on certain types of events and things. So
Definitely.
There's really a lot of ways that can be applied. So it looks like we've not got any questions right now, but Katrina said that she thinks the value map's very interesting. Is there perhaps a link directly to that somewhere, Dominic, or a version you can share with us?
Yeah, so I would say go and check out Perk's website. I think we'll just look up the URL for you now, and we'll drop that into the text stream in a moment. They have a website called valuesandframes.org, and the report, the Common Cause Handbook and the Common Cause for Nature are both available to download on there. And as we said, I think if Ralph's talk will be really great. He'll do it a lot more justice than we can.
Yeah, definitely. Ralph's webinar is going to be on the 10th of October, so make sure you sign up for that one as well. So we'll let you guys get on then and carry on, and we'll take a final break for questions at the end. But if anyone has got questions between now and then, just continue to post them in the chat for us. So back over to you, Dom.
Okay, well, I'll keep going actually, whilst I'll give Dom a bit more of a break. I think he's done most of talking for a while, so I'll keep going. Our next section is how to work conscientiously. And so we'll start with a fundamental regarding paper. And paper is made with wood chips that are pulped to make fiber, which is what you see on screen at the minute. So the wood is broken down in two ways. It can be broken down in two ways, which is chemical pulping with heat, water, and pressure to break down the fibers. This process uses less energy but also produces less usable fiber. Alternatively, it can be mechanical pulping instead of chemical, which is with force and heat. This process uses no chemicals, fewer trees to produce greater quantities of pulp, but uses far more energy. So I'll move on to the next slide, which is what are the main points to avoid when trying to work conscientiously. So one of the main things is avoid using 100% virgin fiber paper, which is paper made from newly cut trees. Avoid linear systems, which extract materials, turn them into short-life products, and then dispose of them without thinking about the longevity and the life cycle and how this can be repeated. Avoid chemical processes. Avoid adhesives where possible. Avoid toxic petroleum-based inks and metallics or fluorescents, for example. There are other types of inks out there that you could use that would create just as stunning of a result. I know that example of the Ivy menu that we just looked at is stunning, and sometimes as a designer, it can tempt you to want to stray away from your values a little bit and create something that's stunning, but you can still create something really, really visually pleasing and quite astounding without using metallics and fluorescents and things like this. And avoid using lithographic print process for short production runs. It's sometimes economically not really very viable anyway, but it also creates large metal plates. For the production of it, you need to create large metal plates, one for each color that is printed. And then solvents are used to clean them at the end as well. So it's not a very sustainable way of working. So next, we'll move on to what to look for when working conscientiously. So try to use post-consumer paper. So this is paper that is obviously come from post-consumer waste. There are varying degrees of this, going from 100% virgin fiber paper from newly cut trees all the way down to 100% post-consumer papers and mixes of both in between. So you can, choose whichever really. There's a whole host of them out there, and there's quite a few that are 100% post-consumer papers that we choose to work with regularly. Try to cut down on the use of bright white papers, which in most cases requires a lot of bleach. But we understand that sometimes organizations or a certain outcome might require a high white paper to give sort of a very stunning bright sheet, I guess. But this, you can also check over this process, and if you must use a high white paper, then try to ensure that the bleaching process is chlorine free. So even if you have to do some bad in some way and there could be something better you can do, always try and research and thoroughly make your choices wisely. So which moves on to vegetable oil-based inks. Try to use those wherever possible, as opposed to the toxic petroleum-based inks that we mentioned previously. Always try to work with waterless and digital printing for short production runs. This uses temperature to transfer ink and doesn't involve plate making and less cleanup, as opposed to the lithographic print that we mentioned. This is quite an unusual one which a lot of people might not consider. But for instance, say you were to print an A4 document professionally at printers, then the printer might buy sheets of A1, which would then print 8 A4s onto that sheet. And these standardizations of A sizes, B sizes, and C sizes have been created so that they're very economic and don't create much waste in between the sheets. Whereas if you were to choose a bespoke size for your page size or your flyer or leaflet or whatever it is that you're creating, then sometimes there might be excessive amounts of waste in between these sheet sizes. So we and other ethical and sustainably minded print designers will work with printers to ensure that they choose a sheet size that's applicable to them. This is growing, it's a growing industry over the past few years, but one of the some of the more unusual examples that we found are papers that are created from algae or bamboo. And even recently, there have been innovations into non-organic tree-free papers. A good example of which is terraskin, which is made from minerals that will eventually degrade back to powdered stone. Yeah, we understand that sometimes organizations must work, like when you're producing large-scale signage, sometimes it can be a bit daunting to try and find sustainable materials to work with. Obviously, it's not always just paper or something like that, and we'll go on to show a few more examples later on. But always look to use sustainable and natural materials that can be locally sourced is a good basic requirement. If you must work with plastics, try to work with recyclable acrylic and polyethylene-based plastics, and where possible, work with closed-loop systems as opposed to linear systems, and think about the whole longevity and life cycle of a product.
So I'll step back in there on the point of closed-loop systems. We wanted to give you this example. There's another TED talk that we really like by Michael Pollan, and it's called Using Nature's Genius in Architecture. And this is a closed-loop system that Pollan presents. It's called Cardboard to Caviar. So where the waste from one organism becomes the resource for the next organism in the system. So what's happening here is, if you look on the left-hand side where you've got the plate with the knife and fork, there was a company that was paid to collect cardboard boxes from a restaurant. They took those cardboard boxes and they shredded them and they turned them into bedding for fish. They were then asked again to collect that bedding. There were obviously worms in the fertilizer that they then took and fed to fish. From the fish, they got caviar, and then they sold that caviar back to the very restaurant from which they'd collected the boxes in the first place. So that's quite a fun example of closed-loop system. Closed-loop systems also exist in the printing industry. So this is the logo of the Forest Stewardship Council, or the FSC, and they manage the production of what's called FSC-approved papers. So here's a closed-loop system, an FSC closed-loop system. So you can see you have the forest at the top there. Toward the right, you have the pulping mill. So the wood has gone from the forest to the pulping mill. It's then turned into paper. The paper mill send that out to the printer. Then we come in, if you like. So we have a little bit of responsibility at this stage as a designer, or even as a an end user. We hopefully we're responsible and we recycle. Try to avoid landfill, of course. So if we recycle that paper, that then goes for de-inking and it's repulped and it goes back to the paper mill, and there you have this closed loop system. Now the FSC, they have a very varying guidelines, but a lot of their focus is on managing organisational responsibilities, protecting the rights of indigenous peoples, managing community relations and worker rights, regulating environmental impact on biodiversity, and also ensuring the maintenance of high conservation forests. What you can see in this image is what are known as residual trees. So this is responsible foresting, if you like. They've taken away some trees, but they've left others, and they're there to facilitate the return of growth and also the return of biodiversity and species to that area that's been partly cleared. Here is the exact opposite. This isn't, of course, a managed loop forest. You can see here that the landscape has been completely decimated, and obviously there's no chance of any species or the life returning to that anytime soon. So yeah, look for FSC approved papers. They're much better. So we did have another break for questions if any have come up.
No, I think we'll be okay to carry on because you had that earlier break. So.
Great. Okay. So jump straight in there to there are some hidden, problems with this, the closed loop system, if you like. We just wanted to touch on those quickly. There's another talk again, George Monbiot. It's called The Price of Everything, and that's on YouTube. And Monbiot highlights what's called the natural capital agenda, which is the process of placing a price on nature in the hope of proving its worth and saving it. So animals and plants and entire environments are defined as maybe ecosystem services or green infrastructure that has an aesthetic value. So a price tag's been placed upon it. We've got a few images here that are supposed to highlight the fact that an example given by Monbiot of Smithy Wood in Sheffield. So it's an ancient woodland, and it plays an integral role in the city's heritage. But part of it's also been earmarked for conversion into a car park. Well, biodiversity offsets, which are part of the natural capital agenda, they say that if you destroy land in one location, cut down trees, for example, you can replace the value, the price tag, you can replace that by creating a new habitat somewhere else. So by replanting trees like for like in another location, and therefore no value is lost. Although, of course, it is, because the heritage contained within the original forest has been completely weakened or, probably destroyed. There was carbon contained, trapped within those trees that have been cut down, so that's been released into the atmosphere. It's in the soil below the trees as well, which has been disturbed, and again, it's been released. And it just goes, it makes sense, doesn't it? You can't replace ancient trees that have existed for hundreds of years with, like for like new trees. It just doesn't make any sense. So the natural capital agenda that was put in place to protect nature is actually resulting in and justifying a threat to it. So here's an image of a paper mill. The key to understanding why total reliance on sustainable foresting isn't as effective is that you can also have 100% post-consumer fibre, and that's that paper that stays within the loop once it's been taken from the forest. It's not perfect, unfortunately. It's not completely possible to avoid using new trees because again, coming back to the idea of the second law of thermodynamics, we promised we'd come back to this. That's state of order slowly transforming to states of disorder and time running in one direction. Well, that says, unfortunately, it's only possible to reconstitute paper fibre 6 times thereabouts before it's no longer suitable for print design, say. So here, the next phase is it goes into a product like an egg box, and then eventually that will degrade to a point at which, you can't use that. Again, so hold on to that thought still, because we are going to come back to it again.
So I'll take over again to elaborate upon the materials other than paper that you might like to work with. So the first example that we're going to look at is exhibition panels, and this is an exhibition identity that was created for a touring exhibition around the topic of sustainable futures. So obviously it was all encompassing from the way in which the didactics and the internal exhibition graphics and introductory panels could be configured in a range of different ways. You see these yellow panels that could, if this exhibition then toured to a different space and couldn't fit in as tall a space, for example, they could be reconfigured to work in a more landscape format. So they're trying to embody the idea of reusability and reconfiguring the elements to create still a stunning result. This is also applied to the simple flyers on the right-hand side. This is sort of just showing a very minimal use of a recycled board to create a single color print. So moving on from this first example, we'll go to this is a bit more of an interesting and quite an unusual example. This is some typography that's been grown from moss by this woman on the right. She comes back and maintains it and helps develop it. So obviously it's quite a hard thing to produce and does require a bit of effort, I guess, but it could also be implemented for short-term use, maybe a typographic introduction to an event on a large scale or something like this on a wall. It's organic materials, it's temporary, and it's incredibly low impact and could obviously be moved and taken somewhere else, and it's actually very, very sustainable for the environment because you're actually creating plants. So we'll move on from there. this is, it might not look like as a sustainable example as some of the others, certainly not as the moths. But this is basically trying to get around the idea of use the spaces which you have, and don't feel like you have to buy something and insert it into the space, such as a plastic board to then draw a sign onto. We're not really implying that with heritage sites and beautiful sites that it's always going to be a viable option to draw all over the walls or paint on the walls, but just more or less if you can work with sustainable paint or a sustainable material to create an image on a wall, then just consider what you've got around you and how you can work in a bit more of a diverse way. Next, we'll move on to this. Well, this is an example that sort of further elaborates upon that. The left is a temporary use sort of chalk sign that's been applied through a stencil. This stencil could be carried to numerous sites, and then chalk simply applied and rubbed onto the ground through the stencil. It could be used with a whole host of materials, I guess, but I think you can get sustainable chalks that are produced very carefully, and then on the right, and they will obviously wash away after a little bit of rain. And then on the right, we have quite the opposite, which is it's almost a graffiti-like image, but it's using a jet wash and a stencil again to wash away the dirt and create a reversed image. And this, quite a fortunate image of some nice trees in this case. And this is a slightly more long-term use, but yet again would eventually over time fade, or you could clean the rest of the wall, or whatever would be applicable really. So moving on from that, thinking about ink this time as a material rather than just the letter forms or things like or pictures that you're printing. And this is we've chosen these to demonstrate a recent story that was created by a 14-year-old in America who studied the different surface areas and amount of ink at which different typefaces use, and he found that the US government were using the font Times New Roman, and he proposed that as a solution to save something like so many $1 billion and a lot of resources, that they should switch to use Garamond, which is a typeface which, as you can probably see by the density of these letters, is a bit thinner. But it's when he was then under scrutiny from the design community and people that are a bit older and more experienced than himself, because typographers were obviously jumped on this and said, well, these typefaces are designed for completely different uses, and the Garamond is developed, and it's actually the letters are slightly not as tall, so therefore they're not covering as much surface area anyway, so they will use less ink, and when you print them at a smaller size, they'll be illegible compared to the Times New Roman at that same small size. So this was basically to highlight the point of make sure you do good research or work with designers and professionals that will do research and know what they're talking about, and not just go for gimmicks. One or two of which we have on the next slide. These are some fonts that have been created to be like highly sustainable fonts. So although they might look decorative and probably work in this context of sort of a large font, which could be used as a sign or whatever, they're actually intended to be printed very small in a book. And where the gaps are on these first two, on the Ryman Eco and the Eco Sans, where you see the dots or the lines missed out, ink, when it is printed, is actually merged. It basically bleeds over a little bit. So the intention is that the ink that is printed would bleed and fill the lines and the dots and the spaces where there isn't any ink, and you won't have overprinted unnecessary ink in those spaces. But these have been seen as a bit gimmicky in places, and although they are nice and they are very interesting and are probably usable, there are other ways to approach typography and ink use in a more traditional sense, which brings us to the last typeface, which is called Gulliver, and this was created in the 90s, and it was adopted by USA Today, the national newspaper, when they had to resize. They chose to resize their newspaper and go to a smaller size, and then the designers there were challenged with fitting the same amount of content into a smaller size paper, or as much content as they possibly could. So they worked with a typographer and developed this typeface, which allowed them to increase the amount of words they could fit on a page, while still keeping a very traditional aesthetic to fonts. So this brings us to our final tip in this section, which is understand the wider impacts of material production and choice. So I'll move on from there and pass over back to Dom.
Okay, so we wanted to talk as well about how to best position your organisation to deliver conscientious design. Now, I might go through this a little bit quick because I'm worried about the time running out, but we can always come back to it. So when working with varying budgets and suppliers, we probably recommend investing in some brand guidelines. They can be, tad time-consuming to achieve, but they're a really kind of sound resource once you have them. This is an example of the standards that have been put together by the National Trust to help them produce communication that lives and breathes their organisational values. So you can have a set, for what you do. It contains sections that define, what the organisation stands for, going back to the points from Sinek, and tone of voice, how best to use the logo and the colour palette, and it also draws attention to the National Trust's use of typeface. Building on what Jimmy was talking about a few moments ago, this is a really interesting idea for a typeface. It's been inspired by a 1748 inscription, which is in a grotto at Stourhead. So it's been taken from there, and obviously because of the source, because of what's inspired it, it naturally embodies a little bit of what the National Trust stand for and what their values are. That kind of preservation of heritage. It's there in their lead typeface.
The National Trust then go on, even in their guidelines, to talk about the use of photography. This is really thorough guidelines. They even describe that photographs of people should show an active National Trust, people doing things and never posed. They should show a sense of excitement, discovery, adventure, which helps make these images inspirational. The most important thing being these images are intended to show the values which National Trust as an organisation align themselves with. Moving on from there, we think one of the most interesting parts of these brand guidelines are this part, which is all National Trust publications should be printed on white paper with a matte silk or uncoated finish. Avoid glossy papers, which can be difficult to read due to the reflection of light. To minimise our environmental footprint, all paper products should therefore be produced using paper made from 100% post-consumer waste. This is obviously something that we've gone over earlier on in the presentation, and which brings us to our final tip of this section, which is put guidelines in place that help to ensure that your organisation stays true to its values.
Okay, so we'll now close with the wider implications of conscientious design. I wanted to show you quickly this comparison. This came together quite naturally while we were, compiling this talk. It's the repetition of circles, and so here you've got Sinek's golden circle, where you're starting with your own beliefs and values in the centre, and you're radiating those out. You've got the bleed over effect, where you have the values that you embody in your work and that you talk about, and how they engage other values that are closely associated. And then you have closed loop systems, in this case in forestry management. So the very values that are being embedded in all of this work then radiate out, and they're actually affecting an entire industry at this stage. It's all being defined by values and by what we believe in, and hopefully the positive messaging that's contained within that. Here's an example of it going beyond a paper mill loop. So you can see that, consumers and users, their influence in design, that can influence academics and education. It can have an impact upon investors and policymakers, which then define or redefine what resource management means. And you can see it comes full circle. So we can create these massive closed loops if only we're conscientious with the way we work. So yeah, hopefully that represents real change, and we're inspiring others to pass on our ideas. Now, we're going to try and take this all the way back to the second law of thermodynamics again. So states of order slowly transform into states of disorder, time running in one direction, and the rule there that is, anything that can go wrong will probably, or more than likely, go wrong. Well, so why bother then, to take any of this talk on board if that's the outcome regardless? Well, wanted to show you this quote from one of our favourite philosophers, Albert Camus, you may have heard of, and in his book The Plague, he says, "All I know is that one must do one's best, and this is the only thing that can give us hope for peace, or failing that, good death. This is what may give relief to men, and even if it does not save them, it does them the least possible harm, and even sometimes a little good." So keeping that quote in mind, and thinking back to the thermodynamic law, well, the same science says that over a long enough time period, the beauty of it is whatever can happen will happen. So the law does not rule out the possibility of all of those broken parts coming back together again to create a new form. So this is why we through our work, we always try and reject unconscientious design. We have to provide for the possibility that whatever can happen will happen, and that when it does, it would be best if it involved a little bit of good. And I think that's where we conclude, right?
Yep.
If there are any more questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
Fantastic. Well, we'll just give people a chance to get their questions in. But I think it was really, absolutely fantastic, really inspiring stuff.
Thank you.
I think, like you said, conscientious definitely is the right choice of word rather than sustainable, because it's not just about being green and helping the planet. It's about helping yourself and helping your business as well, helping your institution by being consistent, by being true to your values, by being passionate about what it is that you're doing, and not, caving in for a cheaper, easier option. And I think, yeah, definitely, I think conscientious is a fantastic word and way of looking at what we're designing and what we're doing.
Yeah, great. I think, the word sustainable comes under a little bit of fire in the industry as well. I think people kind of ask, whether or not it really means anything. So I think kind of reframing that as conscientious. I mean, sustainable does mean something, but reframing it as conscientious, I think, is hopefully more encompassing.
Yeah, I always think it's more encompassing. And when you think about work, I think it's a bit more human, and it encourages you to think about the way you work with other people as opposed to just with materials. And how you align your values with the people at which you choose to work with, and how that can then go on to create bigger loops that think about the entire life cycles of a product or a process or anything really.
Yeah, definitely. I was wondering if you were talking a lot about alternative papers and things like vegetable-based inks. I wonder if you guys have any suggestions on good suppliers or places that people can go to look for those.
Yeah, we've actually put together a list of references, which we can circulate if you like. We can either pass that on to you, Jenny, or if anybody wants to get in touch directly, we're happy to do that. But there's a couple of really good ones. There's a good website called lovelyasAtree.com, which provides a guide to a lot of sustainable printers, sustainable materials.
It goes to say that might be a tiny bit out of date by now, but I think, we can certainly, if you get in touch with us, we can try and help show a few more recent ones that we've worked with. I suppose a good note is when we work with printers, we always try to work with local printers to where it's going to be delivered as well. So it's important to think about the best options close to the locality of where it'll be delivered. We work a lot with a company of printers called Calvert's. They're a co-op down in London, and their values as a business align with ours, and they always try to work with paper companies that do as well. What are some other ones? Through going on a trip with Calvert's actually to a few paper mills in France, we heard about a project called the Great Recovery, That's a really interesting website. If you go to greatrecovery.org.uk, sorry, not just greatrecovery.org.uk, that shows some really, really good examples regarding closed loop systems, and there's a lot about suppliers and products and good case studies within there. We've
actually had a question. Sorry, go on, finish.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say there's a wealth of books as well that we can help refer to for further information, and those TED Talks that we spoke about might be a bit more insightful and elaborate upon some of the ideas that we've said.
Fantastic. That's really great, guys, you're offering to help. We have had a question from Rob. So Rob from Fishbone Roman Palace has asked, what would you do if faced with the option of doing something good that might mean you have to suspend your values, or doing nothing?
Yeah.
What do you mean, Bob, by doing something good? But if you guys can answer from Rob's question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think, okay, say putting on a special event, this is Rob, putting on a special event that you have to use a lot of electricity. Right, yeah, so yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I really like projects like that where, you know, the organisers have looked into, you know, sustainable energy sources. To take that one as a example. So I've been to a few gigs, a few concerts where, you know, they've arranged that the band, for example, will be particularly concerned with energy use, so they actually, you know, look into using sustainable energy. It's something that we do as a studio. We're actually lobbying the people that we rent from at the moment to switch the whole building to a provider called Good Energy, who get most of their, in fact, I think all of it from renewable sources. So yeah, I guess just try and be as resourceful as possible.
I think it maybe goes to say as well, when you look at, when we were educated at first about the values map, so it said that everyone in life has all of those values all of those items on there. It's not just that they're at one side of that map. And so sometimes you will engage other values at the same time, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as long as you try to always communicate and you don't sort of either sell your ideas short, sometimes or misconstrue what it is that you're trying to say as the end result. Sometimes that you can still create a powerful or have the effect that you would like to have whilst engaging other values as well. I mean, we've worked on a few projects like that where we have to sort of try to tackle issues of wealth or getting something for free, but it's also about environment, and you have to engage a whole host of values. So I think just making sure that you can put prominence on the right values is a good tip.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So just being honest about it, that we're perhaps not having to give in on some values, but to recess parts of it, and just being honest about it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just about being. I always like humility, a little bit of humility in anything that anybody does. You know, the ability to sort of be honest about what you do, and I think by admitting where there are questions sometimes, and conceding that you might not have all the answers, that's the moment that hopefully people that are interested in what you do and want to support you, they come out of the woodwork and hopefully give you ideas that align with what you're interested in. So.
Really great. Have we got any more final questions from anybody? If we just literally give that 1 minute, and if not, I will say, in the meantime, a really massive thank you to both of you. It's been really inspiring and a great way to finish up the week, and a little bit of time for us on Friday afternoon to maybe start thinking about those values and look into some options of alternative suppliers and ways we could start to be making changes. As well, please do take the time to fill in the survey at the end that will automatically come up. We do appreciate your feedback. It does help us develop what we do, and of course we pass it on to the presenters as well. And finally, don't forget about Ralph's webinar, which is on the 10th of October, which you can sign up for at the usual address at anymeeting.com/greedy squirrel. So I don't think we have any more questions. I'm sure Dom and Jimmy will be more than happy to answer them, though, if anybody has them, if they get in touch via Twitter or in email, and that includes anyone that's listening to this as a recorded session. So thank you very much indeed, guys. It's been hugely inspiring.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you for everybody's time. Really, really do appreciate it. And thank you for the good questions as well. Great.
Thanks then, guys. We'll sign off now.
Okay, thanks. Good weekend, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.